So if you're determining what color to use on your neck and you want that vintage yellow that Fender was using, you need to test on a piece of scrap to make sure you get it right. Also, I've got this old fine woodworking magazine from August 2005, and in here it's actually got all the different coloring. So they took this and they showed how the different colors are going to look before you put this on. And I've got the Watco wipe-on poly, which is very clear, and then I've also used the Waterlox original sealer finish on my tools, on my guitars as well. The Firebird that everyone's asking me to finish is finished in this Waterlox original sealer finisher, and you can see it doesn't really add that much yellow to this maple. This is a piece of flame maple, so even though it shows up that it's dark, it's still not going to really leave that vintage yellow like on a Fender neck. So this is a lacquered Squire bullet neck, and it's just got a little bit darker of a hue. This is a Fender Warmoth neck that I actually finished myself with lacquer, and I put 2 coats of tinted yellow on here, and it actually has that nicer older vintage look. You know, I've had this neck for about 10-15 years now, and some of the lacquer is starting to wear off in the frets. I put a very light coat on. You know, I didn't go real thick like this one here. When you're gonna finish maple, it's really a good idea to test on a different piece of wood with a different type of coloring that you're going to be using. I'm going to use a wipe-on finish on this Strat Neck that I've been building, and I want to go for that tinted yellow look. And so I know if I go with this Waterlox, it's the darkest already, and I can add just a titch more yellow and I'll get that vintage Fender look. But if I'm going to go with this Watco wipe-on poly, I know I'm going to have to add a lot more tint to it. So this is the August 2005 number 178 Fine Woodworking magazine, and it's got all the different wipe-on finishes and which ones they're saying are the best, you know, in terms of clear. They say the wipe-on poly is the best overall. I actually didn't like it that much, but I know it's clear. So just depending on what you're doing. I don't like the way the finish feels. You know, I definitely like the Waterlox finish. It's very hard. So I'll play around with this scrap piece of wood, and it's been sanded down to 220 off my surface sander. What I'll do is I'll put about 3 coats on of some different material that I have floating around here. I got 6 different finishes here, going from lightest to darkest from what I've got around the shop. I've got on the wipe-on poly, Danish oil, teak oil, antique oil, tru-oil, and their Waterlox finish. You can see the different darknesses. So what I'll do is I'll cut up 6 rags, and I'll go over each spot here, put a coat on, take a look at the coloring, and show you what it looks like. If you just want a plain white wood, I would always just go with a wax. These brie waxes are really nice. If you just want to put some sort of something on it, I would go with the wax. So now you're starting to see some difference as you go down the board. Here, the Waterlox is actually bringing out some of the richer tones in the wood. And with the wipe-on poly, you're not really seeing that. So as you're going down, it's definitely getting a little bit darker, but not actually darkening the maple, but, you know, accentuating the highlights of the wood, where this is just very plain. So by the 3rd coat here, you can really tell the difference between the wipe-on poly and the Waterlox. Waterlox definitely is accentuating the figure a little bit better. The wipe-on poly is just kind of coloring, sealing the wood versus coloring it. So next I'll let this dry a couple more hours. I'll come back with some steel wool, burnish some of these up and then put one more coat and see where we're at. Alright, one last coat here. This is the fourth coat. Here's the wipe on poly again. So let this dry for a couple more hours so you can really see how light this is versus the darkness of this one. What I'll do is I'll peel the tape off after this fourth coat here and we can compare versus bare wood. Alright, so looking at these different finishes, the wipe on poly is obviously the lightest and the waterlox is definitely the darkest. I'm actually kind of surprised at the teak and the Danish oil that it came out just slightly darker than I would have thought when you're comparing it to the rest of the finishes here. Alright, so for adding a little bit of tint here, I'm going to use 4 drops of lemon yellow and 2 drops of this honey amber into these jars, and I should get a really good view of what the tint is by doing this consistent across. I've got this eyedropper here and it's going to help me measure this out perfectly. Alright, so you can tell everything's a lot darker already. Start with the wipe on poly. You can see as you get progressively darker here from the wipe on poly to the waterlox, it is getting a lot darker. I am still again surprised with the teak oil and the Danish oil. They did get darker. Alright, we added 6 drops of yellow to this. I thought the last with the amber was too much, so I did, in total now I've got 10 drops of yellow and I've got 2 drops of amber, so I should get a really nice hue now. I just shook all these up. Got some fresh rags. So after one coat here of the darker stain, you can really see the difference. It's interesting how the antique oil definitely has a more yellow. The teak oil, I don't know, I guess has some browns. And as you get towards the waterlox and the tru-oil, the browns aren't standing out as much. So I know there's some variation in the wood here and the coloring. There's some spots here and there. So the coloring won't be perfect. But I definitely like this yellow tint here. I know it's probably not showing up in camera as the right color. Looks more yellow on camera than it does here on the wood. But I'm going to put a second coat on and then I'll make my decision of what I'm going to do. Alright, so we got 2 coats on here from the wipe on poly to the Danish oil to the teak oil to the antique oil, tru-oil, and waterlox. I am kind of loving the antique oil. It's a tad more yellow. I think what I'll do is I'll use the antique oil and add 1 drop of amber to it and call it a day. This is actually a little bit too dark, too much brown. You know, these colors are too light. And I've used waterlox and tru-oil all the time for the last 10 years, so I want to try something different. So I'm going to go with this antique oil with 1 more drop of amber in it, and we'll finish that here next.